All right, welcome back, everybody, to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we're going to talk about some brain injury pioneers, mainly focused on the medical field, but a lot of these characters, especially the ones we're going to cover today, a lot of them were instrumental in developing the knowledge of the brain and also treating brain injuries as well as other kinds of brain conditions. And some of these are lesser known characters. And so I think these characters deserve a little bit of our time and attention because they really advanced our knowledge a lot, even though they don't get a lot of credit for it. But like always, sources will be in the description below. We'd encourage you to give us some feedback in the form of a comment or a like, but we like thumbs ups. Also, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We put this information out weekly, and we try to keep it informative, but also applicable. So with that being said, we have a lot to cover, so let's get into this. So first, we should talk about a man by the name of Thomas Willis, who was a documentarian, but also a doctor. Between the years of 1621 and 1675, he translated a lot of medical texts into English. And English at the time might be a little different than what we have it today, but it was still documentarian. And it was documenting the findings of those like Galen, Socrates, and Celsus. He's reviving some of that medical knowledge that was in Greek and in Latin, and he made it usable for people in his day. His scientific study into the documentation of the anatomy led to a kind of scientific revolution. This is around the same time as like people like Isaac Newton. So a lot of this came to light, and so he published some books. As we can see in this graphic here, he was able to outline the underside of the brain and also detail what is there. And so some of those will look familiar to you. And that is kind of a very big base for anatomy. So, what is inside the skull? And so he authored some books. One of them, which is kind of the basis of brain anatomy, is called Cerebri Anatomy or Brain Anatomy. Um, and so he's bringing this into a new light. He's bringing this information forward. He also authored Nervorum Descriptio, or the nervous system. But he also authored another book that brought the scientific method back into medicine, and that was Pharmaceuticae Rationalis, or rational medicine. The scientific method, which is where you test a hypothesis against a control, and then you come up with a result. And through repeated testing, you're able to create medicine that is rational. And so Thomas Willis had a very big role in making not just brain knowledge be there, but also the knowledge being available to those in the future. And so that's why we should give him a little bit of credit for what we do as brain injury case managers today. But there's more people to talk about. So this individual by the name of Corbinian Brodmann, he was either in Germany or Austria. He started doing this thing called brain mapping, which was building upon this. As you can see, we're building on the foundations and we're adding to it. So between the years of 1868 and 1918 was when he lived, he started brain mapping. And as we can see in this graphic here, he was able to graph out and map a lot of areas into the brain. Now, to give you an extent of how important his work is, there's over 170,000 citations of his work, and they're instrumental in neuroimaging, especially when it comes to MRIs. So he mapped out 48 distinct areas in the brain. So it's not just one organ. He was able to map out a lot of what we now know are brain functions. An example, like the frontal lobe, is for executive functioning. He was able to map out a lot of these areas, and this knowledge is another important foundation and cornerstone of brain injury management, brain injury case management, and brain injury medicine. So he was able to map out those areas. Also, as a little bit of a side note, a fun fact about him, he worked with a certain doctor called Alzheimer, which documented a lot of dementia. but he was in that era where they were really discovering the brain and how brains operate. The previous guy, Mr. Willis, he discovered that the brain is there and is very important. It started the basic functions. Now, Brodmann was what does the brain do and what do the parts of the brain do? And so, working with Alzheimer's and other anatomists, he was able to document that. And that is very important moving forward. So, let's jump forward into time. We'll talk about Mr. Wilder Penfield. Electrical work in the brain, seizures. You typically have to have the foundation and the structure up in a house before you start running the electrical. So, um, Wilder Penfield from 1891 to 1976, he observed brain activity. So, that electrical activity. He was instrumental in developing seizure treatment, see our seizure video. It's not just that someone has a seizure, there's different types. And a seizure is abnormal electrical activity in the brain. So, Dr. Penfield was really working towards that. There were some surgical options for seizures. He's able to develop those treatments that, who knows, they could have saved a lot of lives. He studied sensory and electrical brain activity and stimulation. Stimulation being what brain parts go off when they are stimulated or when the signal is sent to or from those parts of the brain. And so now that the foundation of the house is built, the the structure is built, now we run the electricity. And so the electricity is in there. He developed and learned about the electrical portions of the brain and also the abnormal electrical portions of the brain to include seizures. But there are more people we need to cover. So let's do the plumbing per se. Harvey Cushing, medical doctor, neuroscience. He was alive from 1869 to 1939. He started blood pressure monitoring during surgery. This is especially critical for brain surgery. For those who are either in the medical field or have worked with the medical field, you might have heard of Cushing's reflex. And this is the guy it's named after. It is a test or a reflex for increased intracranial pressure or the response to increased intracranial pressure. So think about all the things that are in the brain. There's limited space in there, let alone the brain, the cerebral spinal fluid, the cerebellum, the brain stem. But if the brain is swelling and causing pressure, or if there is an object in there or a cancer inside the skull with the brain, it could cause pressure. Dr. Cushing also operated on over 2,000 brain tumors. Now, brain tumor is technically a brain injury, but the brain tumor is there and is probably pushing the brain to other areas, increasing the pressure inside of the skull, thus leading to intracranial pressure. And kind of ironically, when I was researching him, he struggled with smoking, but he pioneered smoking cessation even when it wasn't popular. So he said stop smoking. He operated on brain tumors, and he was able to find a reflex for intracranial pressure, all of which very important, including blood pressure monitoring. So that's Dr. Cushing in a nutshell, but there's still another we have to talk about. Dr. W. James Gardner, MD, neurosurgery. 1898 to 1986, he lived a very long and fruitful life. He was a pioneer in the field of brain surgery. He championed something called the G suit. If you've ever seen those pilots who fly supersonic up in very high areas, the G suit pushes blood where it needs to go. So that's why you hear about G, negative G. He also pioneered sitting surgeries or different anatomical positions for surgery. So sitting down, he found was helpful in some surgeries. He was also the chief of neurosurgery at Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic, if you look them up today, they are still one of the forefront clinics and hospitals that does a lot of good research out of there. They are a really good source. So Cleveland Clinic. He was there for over 30 years. And what did he do? He trained neurosurgeons. In a way, he was making his skill infectious. He was transferring that knowledge to the next generation, not just by teaching them, but also writing it down in over 200 papers, which that's a lot by any stretch of the imagination, especially when it comes to the field of neurosurgery. He pioneered treatment for what's called a subdural hematoma, which is again one of those brain injuries that can happen from a car accident, can happen from military or sports trauma, causing that pressure and blood flow to, that bleeding of the brain. An interesting fact about him is that Dr. Gardner, when he was probably about 20 years old, served in the Great War, World War I. He was in the Army as a private. And then he fought in the Second World War as a naval surgeon or a lieutenant commander, which is actually um, he was the equivalent to a major or a lieutenant colonel, really a major. And he was using his surgery to pioneer survivability, not just in the field of warfare, but also for field of brain injury. So people survived um, subdural hematomas because of Dr. Gardner. And I think that's interesting that not only that, he had fought two world wars and fought the brain war in a sense. He had fought the brain war against subdural hematomas. So lots of respect for Dr. Gardner. But with that being said, what does this leave me as a brain injury case manager to conclude? We just talked about some very important people who really don't get a lot of recognition for the contributions that really lead to our whole profession. Those foundations are extremely important. We need a good foundation of knowledge, and we also need to continue documenting and learning. We should also build upon our current knowledge, build upon that house on a good foundation. You've probably heard that before. Build upon a good foundation. That knowledge, let's not keep it to ourselves. Let's share it. Let's document it. Let's put it in a way that saves it for posterity. That way it doesn't get lost. Same thing goes with Cushing's. We now know about Cushing's reflex, and we should be able to share our knowledge, especially when it comes to brain injury. Advancements, they come with experimentation and, yes, challenges. Um, who I just talked about in this PowerPoint, guess what? They all had challenges in their careers. Some went to war, some lived in terrible times, some lived in very difficult times. And so we see that advancement comes when you challenge and apply science and the scientific method. And kind of my final point in making this whole video, we learn much from the past, but there's still more to learn. These gentlemen I've talked about have really built the foundation for the knowledge of brain injury, and they've built upon that. They keep on adding to the vast amounts of knowledge that we already have, but there is always still more to learn. As a brain injury case manager, I can't be satisfied with just knowing person-centeredness, just knowing the basic anatomy, just knowing the basics and benefit coordination. I need to continue to learn. Um, Continuing learning is always something that the brain will do, injured or not injured, and we should continue to strive to learn, especially if you are in the brain injury field. But with that being said, here are my references. You'll find them in the description below. We'd encourage you to give us some feedback, either in the form of a comment telling us maybe there's a brain scientist that really deserves some recognition, or maybe you want to leave us a like. We do appreciate those thumbs ups. Also, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We put out this information weekly. We try to keep it informative, educational, but also applicable. But with that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and don't forget, protect those brains.